Hi, it's Steph, and today I'm going to do a garden chore that I've probably put off for a couple of weeks later than I should have. I'm going to prune my roses and my hydrangeas, and I'm also going to fertilize them. Now, this is an activity or a chore, a garden chore, that you should do late winter or very early spring. Ideally before the buds start coming onto your roses and swelling. This is a knockout rose and it already has some buds coming through, so I'm now again up against time. I have to get it done. So it's something I'm going to do this morning and I'll take you along. The goal when you're pruning them is to open up the canopy of the rose and to make sure that you have good airflow in the rose bush. Now, roses are notorious for getting diseased, and to be honest, the only roses that I have good luck with are the knockouts because they have been bred to be pretty disease resistant. All of my other roses, which I will get to later in the video, really put up a fight for me. And so ideally when you're pruning these, you're trying to think of taking out any of the thin or diseased canes. Any diseased canes meaning any canes that look dry or woody that would not have any new fresh growth. You want to cut those out. Anything that looks too thin and that wouldn't be able to support the weight of a bloom head, get rid of it. And anything that crosses another branch, cut that one out also. And so the goal is to just get it down to a good, nice, healthy height and good open center to provide good airflow for the rose. Okay, so we finished the first rose bush and we're on to the next. So two things that I wanted to mention real quick before we start on this one here is that it's super important to wear proper protection when you're trimming rose bushes because they have thorns, so they're really pokey and scratchy. So long sleeves and some gloves that are nice and thick. So today, instead of those thinner gloves that I typically wear, I opted for these. They're like a nice thick canvas and have leather, so they're going to offer a little more protection when I'm in here pruning this shrub. The other thing is your pruners. Anytime that you are pruning, you want to disinfect your pruners between cuts or between plants. So these are my Felco 2s. These are my favorite garden pruners. And I carry around this small bottle of isopropyl alcohol. So what I'm going to do is anytime that I'm done pruning a plant or shrub or whatever, I'm going to spray my pruners to disinfect them between shrubs. So I've cleaned it up. Let's get going on this one. I finished pruning the knockout roses and this is the after. I've opened up the framework to allow for better airflow, and I've also made them all a uniform height. Here I have another rose that I have to prune. Now that I've done my knockouts, I'm moving on to my other roses. This is a David Austin rose. This is an example of dead wood. You can tell that the wood is just crispy and dry and there's no life to it. So this is the type of branch that you'll want to prune off. And these are nice and green, and you can see already starting with the buds. So that is an example of a good branch, and this is one that you'd want to prune. So I'm going to go ahead and work on that. This is another branch that's very obvious that it's dry and there's no life to it. So this one, it'll actually probably just break right off. Yeah, and there's like no green inside, so you know that it's dead. So this is another one here, so I'm going to prune this off, this off, this off, and this center cane here. And that's what I took off. So I trimmed the height to be more uniform. I also took off anything that was dry with no sign of life. And this one just needs fertilizer now. Depending on the size of the rose, will let you know how much to take off. If it's a newer rose, this was a bare root that I got last year, so this is its second season in my garden. So I don't want to be too brutal with my cutting or my pruning, so I just took off anything that was obviously dead or dry and just kind of trimmed the height so that it would be a little bit more even all the way around. The next thing I'm going to do is prune my hydrangeas. These here are bobo hydrangeas, and they're a Panicle type hydrangea or Panicle. And this type you don't have to worry about pruning it so much because all of the blooms will come up on new wood. If you had a mop type hydrangea, you'd have to be a little more careful about the time frame for pruning because you could potentially prune off the blooms for this year. But since I don't have to worry about those, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through here and I'm going to prune off any of these thinner stems that would make it difficult to support the weight of the blooms, as well as all of this old bloom heads from last year. The goal is just to make it a nice, strong framework for this year's blooms. So here's my last pruning of the bobo hydrangea, and I just wanted to kind of get closer to show you exactly what I'm doing. So you see how there's a thicker branch here? This branch can support the weight of these heavy blooms once they bloom in the summer. But these thinner ones here, like this, they really can't. They're just going to flop over. So you want to clean up all of those and get rid of all of those branches that won't be able to support the weight of the hydrangeas, like these skinny ones like this, and just keep the nice thick framework in place. I have 2 limelight standards behind my driveway walls, and I'm just going to go through and I'm going to prune off any of these weaker branches that won't be able to support the weight of the large blooms. Here's the after of my limelight standard. A standard just means that it's a limelight hydrangea in a tree form. Here in this bed I have 3 little lime hydrangeas. So I'm going to bring the camera in nice and close so I can show you how I prune these. So this is a really thin branch there, so there's no support here and none there, so I'm just going to cut it. I'm going to cut this one out altogether because eventually this one might end up crashing into that branch. So I'm just going to come down here to the bottom and snip it off. Here's an example of some crossing branches. See this one here? It's crossing this one. Eventually it's going to end up weighing down on that branch right there, so you want to cut this one off right there. Anything that crosses or that is too thin or spindly will get cut out. So here's another example of something that is already crossing. This one here is crashing into this one. See? So we want to get rid of all of that crossing as well. Because this center branch is nice and strong, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut that one off. So that now I've opened that up and they're no longer rubbing. This is the little lime hydrangea before I get to it with the pruner, and all of these really thin spindly branches, they did have blooms on them last year, as you can tell here. However, what ends up happening is because of the weight of the blooms, they end up kind of tilting downward and the blooms all end up kind of hanging out on the ground. The goal is to prune out all of this really thin spindly branching and stay with just the thicker branches that will better support the weight of these blooms. So over time, from proper pruning, you'll end up with a structure that looks more like this, where you have a nice round shrub with nice thick supportive branching. I finished pruning all of my hydrangeas and my roses, and the last step is to fertilize. You have 2 options when it comes to fertilizing your hydrangeas. You can either use holly tone or you can use rose tone. Either one will do a good job. And for your roses, obviously you want to use the rose tone. So all you do is go around and you sprinkle some around the drip line of the plant and you're good for the season. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.